send my condolences to little man, nephew, man. We were just on Family Feud together, all of us.
Imagine reaching the absolute pinnacle of success. You've just rocked the Super Bowl stage in front of millions. Your career is having a massive second wind, and your eldest son is finally stepping out of your shadow to become a star in his own right. For Lil Jon, the king of crunk, 2024 and 2025 were years of triumph. But on a freezing February morning in 2026, the music stopped. His son, Nathan Smith, known to the world as DJ Young Slade, didn't just disappear. He vanished into a nightmare that defies logic. He walked out of his Georgia home at 6 a.m. No shoes, no phone, no clothes. Just a 27-year-old man walking into the void. When divers pulled his body from a nearby pond 3 days later, the industry went silent. But then, the Opps started showing up. Men who hadn't spoken to Lil Jon in decades, former business partners, bitter rivals, and rap legends, emerged from the shadows. Some came to mourn, but others are whispering the truth about what really happened that morning. Was this a tragic health crisis? Or is there a darker secret buried in the woods of Milton, Georgia? This isn't just a headline, it's the investigation into the life and mysterious death of Nathan Smith. To understand the weight of what was lost in the woods of Milton, Georgia, in early 2026, you first have to understand the empire that Jonathan Smith, the man the world calls Lil Jon, spent 30 years building. In the high-stakes, fast-moving world of American hip-hop, few figures are as polarizing or as permanent as the king of crunk. He didn't just have hits, he created a frequency. He was the man who turned yeah and okay into a multi-million-dollar vocabulary. By 2024, Lil Jon wasn't just a legacy act, he was experiencing a cultural renaissance. Standing on that Super Bowl 58 stage alongside Usher, draped in the energy of a worldwide audience, it felt like the man was invincible. He had successfully transitioned from the wild, high-energy club anthems of the early 2000s into a respected elder statesman of the genre. He was a producer, a DJ, and a mogul who had survived every trend and every beef. But while the world saw the glasses, the dreads, and the pimp cup, there was a private world in Atlanta that Lil Jon guarded with everything he had. At the center of that world was his eldest son, Nathan Smith. Nathan, known professionally as DJ Young Slade, was born in the spring of 1998, just as his father's East Side Boys movement was beginning to set the South on fire. For most kids born into hip-hop royalty, the path is either one of extreme entitlement or extreme pressure. But Nathan was different. From the time he could crawl, he wasn't just observing the music. He was part of the DNA of it. Imagine being a toddler, barely 2 years old, and having your voice immortalized on one of the biggest club tracks of the era. That was Nathan's reality. He contributed vocals to the 2000 hit Bia Bia before he even knew what a recording studio really was. To the outside world, he was the son of a rap superstar. To the industry, he was a prodigy in the making. But to the people who knew him in Decatur and later in the Milton suburbs, Nathan was a quiet, almost shy soul who possessed a depth that often caught people off guard. The turning point for Nathan didn't happen in a boardroom or at a flashy premiere. It happened in 2008, at an after-party for the Trans World Skateboarding Awards. Nathan was only 10 years old, watching his father from the side of a DJ booth. He didn't see a celebrity, he saw a conductor. He saw how Lil Jon could manipulate the energy of a room with nothing but 2 turntables and a microphone. That night, something clicked. He didn't want to just be Lil Jon's son. He wanted the power to move people. Jon recognized that spark immediately. He didn't force his son into the spotlight. Instead, he gave him the tools. He downloaded Serato, bought him his own decks, and told him to find his own sound. By 12, Nathan was the youngest student in his class at the Scratch DJ Academy. By his early teens, while other kids were worrying about middle school dances, Nathan was on the road as the touring DJ for a then-rising Disney star named Zendaya. He was learning the grind, the late nights, and the stage presence required to survive the industry. Yet despite the fame surrounding his father, the bond between Nathan and Lil Jon remained grounded in something surprisingly ordinary. Nathan would later tell interviewers that his favorite memories weren't the private jets or the backstage passes. They were the quiet afternoons at home, drinking tea and playing video games. It was a jarring contrast to the king of crunk persona. Behind the screaming, "Yeah," was a father who sat with his son in silence, bonding over the things that actually matter. Nathan loved his father so much that he famously had Lil Jon's actual signature tattooed on his body. It wasn't about the brand, it was about the man. It was a permanent mark of respect for the person who taught him how to be a professional without losing his soul. Nathan went on to prove his merit by graduating from NYU's prestigious Tisch School of the Arts in 2020. He wasn't looking for a handout. He wanted to understand the engineering, the production, and the science of sound. He worked with Sauti, produced for Ice Cube's 2024 album Man Down, and was finally being recognized as a powerhouse in his own right by early 2025 when he appeared on MTV's Family Legacy. Everything seemed to be lining up for the Smith family. Lil Jon was at a career high, Nathan was a respected producer, and they had just celebrated the arrival of a new addition to the family, a younger daughter named Nahara, born in 2024. The family was tight-knit, successful, and seemingly untouchable. But the start of 2026 brought a strange shadow over the household. There were whispers that Nathan hadn't been feeling like himself. Some reports suggested he was dealing with a persistent viral infection or a strange rash that wouldn't clear up, leaving him fatigued and out of sorts. On the morning of February 3rd, 2026, the unthinkable happened. At approximately 6 a.m., in the biting cold of a Georgia winter morning, Nathan Smith walked out of his home in Milton. He didn't take his car, he didn't take his wallet, he didn't even take his phone. The one thing a 27-year-old producer is never without. Most chillingly, reports indicated he left without shoes and possibly without clothing, appearing disoriented and in distress. The search that followed was a 3-day descent into hell for Lil Jon and Nicole Smith. Local police, K-9 units, and multi-agency dive teams swarmed the quiet, affluent neighborhood. The missing person posters featuring Nathan's face, the face of a young man who had just been on television and worked with rap legends, started appearing all over social media. The industry held its breath. People couldn't wrap their heads around it. Why would a man with everything to live for walk into the woods with nothing? For 72 hours, the silence from the Milton police was deafening. Every hour that passed made the disoriented theory feel more ominous. Then on February 6th, the news broke. Divers had found a body in a pond at Mayfield Park, just a stone's throw from the family home. It was Nathan, the vibrant, talented, kindest human being Lil Jon had ever known was gone at just 27 years old. The king of Crunk's world had just collapsed, and as the news settled, the questions began to rise. How does a healthy young man end up in a pond in the middle of winter? Why were the police treating it as an open and active investigation, while simultaneously saying there was no sign of foul play? And most importantly, why were Lil Jon's oldest enemies suddenly showing up to the funeral with apologies on their lips and secrets in their eyes? The aftermath of Nathan's death sent a shockwave through the city of Atlanta that didn't just stop at the borders of Georgia, it rippled through the entire history of the Dirty South. But as the grief settled, a strange and uncomfortable tension began to emerge. To understand why Nathan's death felt like more than just a random tragedy to those in the industry, you have to look at the shadow Lil Jon has cast over the game for 30 years. You see, you don't get to the top of the mountain without stepping on a few toes. And in Lil Jon's case, he didn't just step on toes. He built an empire on ground that others claimed was theirs. As the funeral arrangements were made, the Opps, the rivals, the former friends, and the disgruntled business partners began to surface. In the rap world, a funeral is often the only place where the street code and the industry code collide. For Lil Jon, these were men who had carried a decade's worth of resentment, people who felt that the king of Crunk had built his throne on their backs. The first and perhaps most significant shadow over Lil Jon's career was the ghost of TVT Records. Back in the early 2000s, while the world was screaming, "Get low," a war was brewing behind the scenes. Steve Gottlieb and TVT Records were the engine behind Lil Jon's multi-platinum success, but that engine was running on dirty oil. Lil Jon, alongside artists like Pitbull, eventually realized that the millions of dollars they were generating weren't trickling down to the creators. The legal battles were legendary. Lil Jon was effectively held hostage by his own contract, unable to release his solo album Crunk Rock for 4 long years. That kind of corporate warfare doesn't just leave a dent in your bank account, it creates a culture of paranoia. When Nathan died, people began to look back at those years of litigation. They remembered how Lil Jon had to fight just to own his own name. While there is no direct link between corporate beef and a family tragedy, the industry whisper network began to wonder if the stress of the business, the constant betrayals, had created an environment where Nathan felt the weight of his father's crown. But the corporate beef was nothing compared to the personal betrayals. The most painful op to show up in the conversation was Big Sam. Along with Lil Bo, Big Sam was an original member of the East Side Boys. They were the ones in the trenches with John when they were playing local clubs for gas money. But when the money got long, the friendship got short. Big Sam went on the record years ago, stripping away the politically correct excuses for why the group dismantled. He said it plainly. The group broke up because of the money. He described a sudden shift in energy the moment he started asking where his royalties were. He felt like he was being phased out of the movement he helped start. When a founding member of your circle feels like they were done dirty, that energy lingers in the city. At the time of Nathan's passing, many wondered if the original East Side Boys would finally break their silence. And they did, but not with the vitriol people expected. Instead, they showed up with a heavy silence that spoke volumes. Seeing the man you once considered a brother lose his firstborn son has a way of making royalty disputes look incredibly small. Then there was the regional Crunk War. For years, the city of Memphis had a standing grudge against Lil Jon. Legends like DJ Paul and Juicy J of 3 6 Mafia, along with pioneers like Gangsta Pat, had always maintained that Atlanta didn't invent crunk. They just marketed it better. They claimed that the buck sound of Memphis was the true father of the movement, and that Lil Jon had taken their raw, aggressive energy and polished it for the suburbs. There were years of checking Jon in interviews, subtle diss tracks, and a territorial tension that defined the 2000s. Even within Atlanta, groups like D4L and Dem Franchise Boys felt that Jon had encroached on their snap music territory during his later hits. These weren't just musical disagreements, these were ops in the truest sense. Men who felt Lil Jon had taken food off their tables by claiming a sound that wasn't his. But when the news hit that Nathan had been found in that pond, the atmosphere changed. The ops didn't come to gloat, they came to apologize. It was a surreal moment in hip-hop history. Men who hadn't been in the same room as Lil Jon in 15 years were suddenly sending private messages and showing up to pay respects. The apology wasn't always for the specific beef. It was an apology for the game itself. It was an acknowledgement that while they were all fighting over credits, royalties, and who started what, a young man, a nephew to the culture, was growing up in the middle of that storm. The industry insiders started noticing something even more chilling. While the police were sticking to their no foul play narrative, some of the street-affiliated figures who showed up were quietly confirming a different story. They weren't talking about a murder in the traditional sense, but a murder of the spirit. They spoke about how Nathan, despite his talent, was hyper-aware of his father's enemies. He lived in a world where his father was a king, but a king with a target on his back. They whispered about the disoriented state Nathan was found in. In the weeks leading up to February 3rd, Nathan had reportedly been off. Some of the people who were at the funeral hinted that Nathan might have been more aware of the industry's dark side than he let on. They suggested that the viral infection, or rash, the police mentioned, might have been a cover for something more psychological. A breakdown triggered by the immense pressure of carrying the Smith legacy in an industry that had tried to tear his father down for decades. As the second day of the wake passed, the tension moved from the boardrooms to the streets of Milton. Why was the investigation still open and active if there was no foul play? In the U.S. legal system, that usually means they are waiting for a toxicology report that they expect to be explosive. The ops who showed up weren't just there to say sorry for the past. They were there because they knew that the king of crunk was now a grieving father who had nothing left to lose. And in the rap game, a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. The apologies were a way of clearing the air before whatever truth Nathan was carrying finally came to light. Some said Nathan had been targeted, not by a person, but by a lifestyle that he never asked for. He was a 27-year-old genius who had worked with Ice Cube and Zendaya, yet he died alone, barefoot in a cold pond. The Opps knew that if the truth came out, that the industry's toxicity had played a role in Nathan's mental or physical decline, the fallout would be bigger than any rap beef in history. They weren't just apologizing to Jon, they were trying to make peace with the ghost of a young man who represented the best of them, and whose death exposed the worst of the world they all inhabit. By the time the sun began to set on the evening of February 6, 2026, the quiet, wooded streets of Milton, Georgia, felt less like a suburban sanctuary and more like a crime scene that the world was watching in real time. The recovery of Nathan Smith's body from the pond at Mayfield Park didn't bring the closure everyone expected. Instead, it cracked open a door to a set of questions that the Milton Police Department seemed hesitant to answer. The official line was delivered with the usual clinical detachment, no immediate signs of foul play. But in the age of instant information and deep-rooted industry connections, no signs of foul play rarely tells the whole story. While the authorities were busy filing paperwork, the streets and the studios were buzzing with a different narrative. This is where the story shifts from a tragic accident to something much more complex. A mystery that the Opps and the elders of the rap game are now quietly confirming through their actions and their whispered apologies. To understand what the police won't say, you have to look at the state Nathan was in when he vanished. He didn't just walk out of his house, he fled. At 6 a.m., in the biting dawn of a Georgia February, Nathan left behind every single tether to his life. No phone, the lifeline of any modern music producer. No wallet, no keys, and most hauntingly, no shoes. For a man who was described as meticulous, professional, and deeply grounded, this wasn't a walk, this was a flight. The police used the word disoriented, a term that covers 1,000 different sins. But those close to the situation began to leak details that painted a much more disturbing picture. There were mentions of a viral infection, a rash that had been plaguing Nathan in the weeks prior. In medical circles, certain viral infections can lead to rare but devastating neurological complications, swelling of the brain, sudden onset psychosis, or extreme delirium. Was Nathan in the grip of a medical emergency that stripped him of his reason? If so, why was a 27-year-old man, the son of one of the wealthiest men in Atlanta music, left in a state where he could wander into the freezing woods alone? This is the murder that the industry is talking about. Not a literal hitman in the bushes, but a murder of negligence, or a failure of a system that should have protected a young man in crisis. This is why the Opps showed up. In the hyper-masculine, often unforgiving world of hip-hop, you don't apologize to your rival unless you realize the game has gone too far. When legends like E40 and Shaq reached out, they weren't just offering standard condolences. E40's voice, thick with emotion, calling Nathan his nephew, was a signal to the rest of the industry. He reminded everyone that just a few months prior, they were all on the set of Family Feud together. That image, the Smith family laughing, competing, and appearing as the gold standard of black excellence, was now shattered. The Opps, who had spent years counting Lil Jon's money and questioning his legacy, suddenly saw the man behind the glasses. They saw a father who had given his son everything, only to lose him to a mystery that started in his own living room. The apologies were for the distractions. They were for the decades of beef that perhaps made it harder for a family to scream for help when things were falling apart behind closed doors. The confirmation that some are whispering about involves the timeline of those 3 missing days. How does a man vanish in a populated, affluent suburb and remain undiscovered for 72 hours? Mayfield Park is not the Amazon rainforest. It is a community space near Nathan's residence. The fact that it took a multi-agency search and a team of divers 3 days to find him in a pond so close to home has led many to believe that Nathan wasn't in that pond the whole time. This is where the active and open status of the investigation becomes critical. If the police truly believed this was a simple case of a disoriented man wandering into water, the case would be moving toward a quick closure. But the Criminal Investigations Division is digging. They are looking at the phone records Nathan left behind. They are looking at who he spoke to in the hours before his 6 a.m. flight. They are looking for the why. Some insiders are suggesting that Nathan's disorientation wasn't just medical, that he may have been under immense psychological pressure, perhaps even receiving threats or feeling the weight of an industry that never truly let his father be at peace. The most heartbreaking part of this confirmation is the silence from the toxicology and autopsy reports. As of mid-February 2026, the public is being fed a diet of no further details. In the vacuum of that silence, the theory of a broken spirit has taken hold. The Opps who showed up at the funeral were reportedly seen speaking in low tones about the curse of the second generation. They saw in Nathan a young man who did everything right: the NYU degree, the high-profile productions, the humble attitude, and yet he couldn't escape the gravity of the world his father built. When Lil Jon posted that video of Nathan's Spotify music, writing about how proud he was that Nathan did it all on his own, it felt like a final defense of his son's autonomy. It was as if Jon was telling the world, he wasn't just my son, he was his own man. But the tragedy is that the world might never have let him be just Nathan Smith. As the investigation remains open, the city of Atlanta sits in a state of uneasy mourning. You have a father, the king of crunk, a man who gave the world the soundtrack to its wildest nights, now sitting in the quietest silence imaginable. He is left to raise a young daughter, Nahara, in a house that will forever echo with the absence of her big brother. The mystery that refuses to stay buried isn't just about how Nathan died. It's about how we treat our icons and their children. The Opps have confirmed that the beef doesn't matter, the money doesn't matter, and the sound doesn't matter when the cost is a human life. They are apologizing because they realize that while they were playing a game of Thrones, a prince was lost. Nathan Smith, DJ Young Slade, was the bridge between the wild energy of the 2000s and the sophisticated production of the future. He was 27, the age where so many legends are lost, and his death has become a mirror for an industry that is forced to look at its own reflection. Whether the Milton police ever release the full truth or not, the Opps have already made their judgment. This was a tragedy that should have been prevented, a mystery that has left a permanent scar on the heart of the South, and a debt that can never be repaid. Rest in peace, Nathan. The music you left behind is the only answer we may ever get. This story is a haunting reminder that behind the platinum plaques and the high-energy anthems, these are real families facing unimaginable pain. Lil Jon gave the world a reason to celebrate for decades, and now in his darkest hour, the community is trying to give that strength back to him. But the questions surrounding Nathan Smith's final hours aren't going away. Was it a medical freak accident, or is there more to the story that the Milton police are keeping under wraps? We want to hear from you. Do you think the industry pressure is becoming too much for the next generation? Or was this just a heartbreaking twist of fate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation respectful for the family. If you found this deep dive insightful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're dedicated to bringing you the truth behind the headlines and honoring the legacies of the artists who shaped our culture. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update as this investigation continues to unfold. Rest in peace, DJ Young Slade. Your music and your spirit will never be forgotten. Until next time, stay safe and keep your loved ones close.